December 15th, 1989, somewhere along Colombia's Tolú coastline, Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha was running barefoot through mud with an $8 billion fortune that meant nothing anymore. Colombian National Police helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights cutting through pre-dawn fog like surgical blades. His son, 17 years old, never killed anyone, now marked for death, sprinted beside him. The emerald was still in Gacha's pocket, raw, uncut, the size of a walnut, green fire pulled from his own mines. He'd carried it for 7 years, through massacres and meetings, through raids on rival syndicates and champagne toasts with politicians. Pablo Escobar once told associates, "Gacha enjoys the killing too much." The body count would never be verified. 5,000 deaths? 8,000? More than Pablo himself? Radio static crackled from the police channel. They knew exactly where he was. 2 choices remained: surrender or die in the crossfire he'd spent a decade perfecting. What did he whisper to his son in those final 90 seconds? You're about to find out why the most violent man in the Medellín Cartel died clutching a stone. By 1982, Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha had built 2 empires on the same Colombian soil. One the world could see, one the world preferred to ignore. In Pacho and across the Emerald Belt stretching toward Muzo, he owned the richest mines in the Western Hemisphere. Leather satchels filled with uncut stones moved through his offices like briefcases in a bank. He appeared in newspapers as the Emerald Baron, a legitimate businessman with political connections and charity galas. Behind that veneer, he was already chief enforcer for the Medellín Cartel, the man Pablo Escobar called when negotiation failed and violence became policy. Their partnership was surgical. Pablo handled cocaine logistics and distribution networks. Gacha handled problems that required guns, fear, and bodies that wouldn't be found. He controlled the Coscuez and Muso mines, the geological jackpots that produced 70% of the world's finest emeralds. But one stone never entered the trade. One raw emerald, the size of a walnut, stayed in his pocket through every meeting, every execution, every public appearance. People close to him said he'd touch it before giving orders, rolling it between his fingers like a rosary bead. The emerald wasn't about wealth. It was about something darker. Between 1984 and 1985, while his emerald business flourished and politicians smiled for photographs at his ranches, Gacha was building something the Colombian government wouldn't fully understand until it was too late. His private compounds near Pacho became training grounds modeled on Nazi SS structure, discipline, ideology, and systematic violence. He collected Third Reich memorabilia with the obsession of a scholar: swastikas, SS daggers, portraits of Hitler displayed in rooms where cartel strategy sessions took place. Investigators would later find entire wings filled with Nazi artifacts. His nickname was El Mexicano, a strange irony for a man who worshipped German fascism. But the ideology wasn't cosplay, it was operational. Under his command, 3,000 sicarios trained in military tactics, learned counterinsurgency methods from Israeli and British mercenaries, and operated with the efficiency of a paramilitary force. During cartel meetings, an SS dagger sat on his desk like a paperweight. The message was clear. Killing wasn't just business for Gacha. It was ideological. It was structured. It was something he believed in. That made him more dangerous than anyone Pablo Escobar had ever worked with. The body count started piling up across Colombia between 1985 and 1987, but nobody could agree on the numbers. 5,000 deaths? 8,000. More. Mass graves were discovered near emerald mining regions where entire villages had been erased. Men, women, children eliminated because they sided with rival syndicates or simply lived in the wrong territory. Gacha co-founded MAS, Muerte a Secuestradores, Death to Kidnappers, with Escobar and other cartel leaders in 1981. What began as retaliation against guerrillas became systematic terror. Truck beds in the Magdalena Medio region carried bodies like cargo. Witnesses described a ritual. After major operations, Gacha would pull the emerald from his pocket and examine it under lamplight, rolling it between his fingers while casualty reports came through. The violence wasn't rage, it was calculated. Every massacre served strategic purpose: control territory, eliminate competition, spread fear so deep that rivals would surrender before fighting began. Pablo Escobar reportedly told close associates, "Gacha enjoys it too much." That wasn't criticism, it was concern. Even the most ruthless cocaine trafficker in history was worried about his partner's appetite for blood. By 1987, American intelligence agencies were starting to understand that Rodriguez Gacha wasn't just Pablo Escobar's business partner. He was running a parallel empire that converted cocaine profits into legitimate wealth through Colombia's emerald trade. DEA surveillance in Bogota and intelligence briefings in Washington, D.C. tracked the laundering network. Cash from drug sales purchased uncut emeralds, which moved through legal channels to international buyers in New York, Tel Aviv, and Hong Kong. The Colombian government, pressured by American extradition treaties, began focusing resources on cartel leadership. In 1988, the United States formally indicted Gacha for drug trafficking. Surveillance photos captured him at emerald auctions, at mines, in transit with leather cases that investigators suspected held millions in gemstones. But one detail kept appearing in intelligence profiles, mentioned by informants and confirmed by watchers. Gacha always carried one specific emerald that never appeared in any transaction. Raw, uncut, kept in his jacket or trouser pocket. Why? DEA analysts couldn't answer. They cataloged his financial networks, mapped his properties, identified his associates. The emerald became profile detail number 23 in his classified dossier. Agents were instructed to watch for it during potential arrest scenarios. A greenstone, walnut-sized, always on his person. They thought separating Gacha from Escobar might fracture the cartel's operations. They thought the emerald was just superstition, a quirk to note but not prioritize. They were wrong on both counts. The two men were bound by mutual dependence and escalating paranoia as government pressure intensified, and the emerald, well, you're about to see why it mattered more than anyone realized. Between 1987 and 1988, Gacha's violence expanded beyond the cocaine trade into Colombia's broader conflicts, and the scope of what he was building became terrifyingly clear. He funneled millions into right-wing paramilitary groups, private armies that battled FARC guerrillas, and M-19 rebels in rural regions where government control was weak and land wars determined who lived and who vanished. Colombian investigators later documented the financing, bank transfers routing through emerald sales, cash deliveries in armored trucks, weapons purchases that equipped thousands of fighters with automatic rifles, grenades, rocket launchers, and military-grade equipment that shouldn't have been available to civilian forces. On his ranches, hidden behind legitimate farming operations and cattle pastures, were training facilities that rivaled government military bases in sophistication and brutality. Israeli mercenaries taught counterinsurgency tactics they'd learned in Lebanon and the West Bank. British ex-SAS soldiers ran combat drills. Former soldiers from conflicts in Central America and Africa trained his sicarios in ambush techniques, interrogation methods, and psychological warfare designed to break communities before bullets were necessary. The armories held thousands of weapons, enough to supply a sustained military campaign. During interrogations of captured rivals or suspected informants, multiple sources reported seeing Gacha hold the emerald while ordering executions. He'd roll it between his fingers, study the green depths like he was reading prophecy in the stone, then deliver verdicts with surgical calm. His Nazi obsession wasn't historical fascination or eccentric collecting. It was operational philosophy. He was building a fascist army on Colombian soil, structured on ideological commitment to violence rather than just profit motive. And the emerald, always present during these decisions, seemed to anchor him during moments that sent hundreds to their deaths. The most violent man in the cartel was also the most methodical. By early 1989, the Medellín Cartel was under siege from multiple directions, and internal fractures were becoming visible to anyone paying attention. Colombian government crackdowns had intensified after the Palace of Justice siege in 1985, when cartel-linked M-19 militants stormed the Supreme Court building in Bogota, resulting in a firefight that killed half the justices and destroyed extradition case files in what many believed was cartel-orchestrated chaos. The government's response had been escalation, more resources, more cooperation with American DEA, more political will to pursue cartel leadership regardless of bribes or threats. Pablo Escobar, reading the political landscape with the strategic mind that had built his empire, wanted to explore negotiation, possible deals with authorities, strategic surrenders that might preserve some power and wealth, maybe even political legitimacy if the price was right. Gacha wanted war. In safe houses across Medellín, the two men argued through intermediates in increasingly tense, direct confrontations. Escobar reportedly told his closest associates, "Gacha's methods bring too much heat." Translation: the body count, the paramilitary connections, the Nazi memorabilia that kept appearing in police raids. It was making compromise politically impossible. At strategy meetings in reinforced rooms, with armed guards outside, maps covered tables showing police positions, government targets, potential escape routes to Panama or Venezuela. Gacha's kill lists sat beside coffee cups and ashtrays filled with cigarette butts from night-long planning sessions. And the emerald, always the emerald, sat on the table where Gacha could reach it. Associates noticed he couldn't stop touching it during tense discussions, rolling it like a talisman or a trigger for decisions only he understood. The violence that had made him valuable to the cartel was now making him a liability. But Gacha wasn't interested in surrender or negotiation. For him, violence wasn't a business tactic. It was identity. And that fundamental difference would determine how his story ended. Mid-1989, the Colombian National Police mobilized resources specifically targeting cartel leadership with an intensity that hadn't existed before. The Search Block, an elite unit that would later hunt Pablo Escobar himself through Medellín's streets, formed with American DEA support, Colombian military intelligence backing, and funding that suggested this wasn't just another anti-drug operation, but a genuine war against narco-terrorism. Intelligence breakthroughs came from multiple sources, informants who'd survived Gacha's purges and were willing to talk once they felt protected, surveillance technology provided by American agencies, and wiretaps that caught fragments of movement patterns and communication protocols. Satellite reconnaissance mapped his ranch locations, the main compound near Pacho, secondary properties across Cundinamarca and Boyacá, beachfront safe houses along the Caribbean coast that provided escape routes by water. The emerald appeared in intelligence briefings as an identifying marker, elevated from profile footnote to operational detail. Subject always carries raw emerald stone, approximately walnut-sized, green in color, keeps it on his person at all times. Consider this a positive ID characteristic during visual confirmation. Agents were specifically told to watch for it during raids and potential arrest scenarios. One close call came at the Pacho Ranch in late June. Helicopter surveillance detected unusual vehicle movement, more cars than normal, defensive positioning that suggested high-value targets were present. Ground units prepared to move in with arrest warrants and enough firepower to handle Gacha's Sicario army. But Gacha had counter-surveillance networks that matched government resources. Paid informants inside police ranks, feeding real-time updates, radio scanners monitoring official channels, spotters positioned along every access road with instructions to report any unusual military or police activity. He evacuated the compound 20 minutes before the raid. When search block officers finally entered, securing rooms one by one with weapons raised, they found warm coffee cups still steaming on tables, documents spread across desks showing cartel financial networks, maps with positions marked, and in the main office, a small circular indentation in the desk's leather surface where something round had been resting moments before. The emerald had been there. Gacha was already 3 provinces away, reorganizing his security, calculating his next move, while authorities cataloged what he'd left behind and realized how close they'd come to ending this. November and December 1989 became a shrinking cage where every option narrowed and every safe house became temporary. Multiple locations were raided across Colombia in coordinated strikes. Properties in Medellín, ranches in rural Antioquia, apartments in Bogotá that served as logistics hubs. Associates were captured, interrogated under pressure that broke some and killed others, and either turned into informants feeding intelligence back to search block or disappeared into Colombia's prison system. The Colombian government, desperate to show progress against cartels and justify American cooperation, placed a $1.5 million bounty on Gacha's head, a record reward that turned everyone into a potential spy and made trust impossible. Gacha went into hiding with his 17-year-old son, Freddie, refusing to separate, even though every security advisor he still trusted told him the boy was a liability, a weakness that limited movement options and escape routes, because Gacha wouldn't risk scenarios that might leave Freddie exposed. Disguises were prepared, fake identification papers with new names and biographical details, cash bundles in different currencies ready for border crossings, contacts in Panama and Venezuela who could provide sanctuary if they reached international territory. But the emerald never left Gacha's person. Even in flight, even with helicopters hunting him and informants closing in, even when traveling light meant survival advantage, he kept it in his pocket. Freddie reportedly asked about it once during one of their movements between safe houses. "Why do you still carry that?" His father's answer, if he gave one, isn't recorded in any account. Some investigators believe the stone represented Gacha's first mine seizure in the early 1980s, his first fortune built on violence, his first mass killing to claim emerald territory from rivals. Others think it was pure superstition, a talisman that had kept him alive through a decade of warfare and became psychologically impossible to abandon. Either way, he wouldn't let it go. And that attachment, that refusal to abandon the past even when the present demanded it, was about to cost him everything. December 15, 1989, began before dawn along Colombia's Caribbean coastline near Tolú. Colombian National Police had received intelligence. Sources differ on whether it came from a captured associate turned informant, intercepted satellite communication, or paid tip from someone in Gacha's rapidly dissolving security network that he was hiding at a beach compound, a last resort safe house where jungle vegetation met coastal waters and escape routes theoretically existed by boat to Panama or island territories beyond Colombian jurisdiction. The location was isolated, surrounded by dense tropical growth, and accessible only by narrow unpaved roads that made conventional ground assault difficult and time-consuming. The tactical plan was aerial insertion, fast, overwhelming helicopter force before anyone inside could organize defense or evacuation. At approximately 6:30 a.m., rotor noise echoed across the compound, cutting through morning silence with mechanical precision. Gacha and his son were inside the main structure when the sound registered, when training and instinct translated noise into immediate threat assessment. 90 seconds. That's the window that existed between recognition and engagement, between hearing helicopters and bullets finding targets. Police reports and subsequent investigations documented the sequence through radio transmissions, ballistic evidence, and witness statements from officers involved. Gacha and Freddie emerged from the building's rear entrance, running toward the jungle perimeter, where vegetation might provide cover and escape routes into deeper wilderness. The emerald was in Gacha's front trouser pocket. During the sprint through mud churned by recent rain, navigating undergrowth and exposed roots, the stone fell, slipped from fabric that wasn't designed to secure objects during combat movement. You can reconstruct what happened next from the physical evidence and officer observations. Gacha stopped mid-escape, with helicopter searchlights tracking movement patterns and weapons targeting runners, bent down to retrieve the emerald from mud, secured it again, and resumed running. His son was ahead of him now, 20 yards closer to the tree line. Then the shooting started. The firefight lasted less than 2 minutes from first shot to final casualty, but every second was documented through multiple channels. Police radio transmissions recording real-time updates, ballistic analysis conducted during investigation, autopsy reports establishing bullet trajectories and impact sequences. Freddie was hit first, multiple rounds from helicopter-mounted automatic weapons finding him as he ran across open ground toward jungle cover. He went down in the mud approximately 30 yards from the tree line, mortally wounded but not instantly killed. Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha turned back toward his son despite the continuing gunfire, despite the helicopters maintaining position overhead, despite the tactical impossibility of survival if he abandoned forward movement toward cover. Officers who were present reported he moved back toward Freddie, crossing exposed terrain, reaching him as more rounds found both targets. When search block ground units finally secured the area, After aerial units confirmed no remaining threats, approaching the bodies with weapons ready and photographer documenting the scene for evidence and media, they found what intelligence profiles had predicted for months. In Gacha's right hand, clenched so tightly that rigor mortis and death grip required officers to pry his fingers open one by one, was the emerald, raw, uncut, green stone now covered in blood that had dried dark in tropical heat and caked with mud from the ground where he'd fallen. Media descended on Tolú within hours of confirmation, helicopters carrying journalists and camera crews to document what would become headline news across Colombia and international coverage. El Mexicano eliminated, announcements proclaimed from Bogotá to Washington, D.C., marking the end of one of the Medellín Cartel's most violent leaders. Police photographed everything: the compound, the escape route, the bodies positioned where they'd fallen, and the emerald specifically, now cataloged as evidence item number 47 in the official case file. Later gemological analysis, conducted as part of the investigation into Gacha's Emerald Empire, revealed details that hadn't been known even to most of his close associates. The stone came from the Muzo mines, from the specific mining section Gacha had violently seized in 1982 during his first major territorial conquest. 7 men had died in that takeover. Rival operators who'd controlled the section before Gacha decided he wanted it. His first massacre, his first fortune built directly on killing rather than just drug trafficking. The emerald represented his origin point, the moment when violence became not just a tool, but an identity, and he'd carried it through every subsequent killing, every cartel strategy session, every narrow escape from authorities, every public appearance where he played the legitimate businessman while bodies piled up in provinces he controlled. It had become the last thing he held when everything else was gone. Today, mention Rodríguez Gacha's name, and most people draw blanks, even those who know Escobar's story. His body count was higher, 5,000 minimum, possibly 10,000. His methods were more brutal, more systematic. But he died in 1989, early enough that narco legend focused on Pablo's war. The emerald's fate remains disputed. Some records suggest destruction per evidence protocol. Others claim it vanished during administrative transfers. Either way, it became a symbol of how geological wealth and human blood mixed in Colombia's emerald trade, how one man's talisman was another family's nightmare. The lesson lives in the gap between violence and memory. Gacha believed the emerald connected him to his origin, as if holding on to the beginning would protect him from the end. It didn't. The stone was found clenched in a dead man's hand, meaning nothing except evidence of how far he'd come and how little it mattered. The most violent are rarely the most remembered, and sometimes the things we hold on to tightest are what keep us from letting go when we should run.